Hi friends, welcome back to STEWARD. I'm your host, Sophia Lee, and if you've been listening since the beginning, you know that we primarily have focused on climate and sustainability. After almost a decade in this space, I still believe storytelling, innovation, and regulation is what can bring about change. But I've also come to the conclusion that there is a consciousness gap in our society. There is an inconsistency in our concern for the world versus how we move through it. Even if we completely transition to renewables, reformed agriculture, and transportation, if we still continue to live out of sync with nature, exploit resources, hoard wealth, and demand exponential growth, then we'll never live in a sustainable world. And this is why STEWARD is evolving into having conversations that cover the intersection of spirituality, sustainability, and longevity. We will hold space for the duality of living as a conscious being in late-stage capitalism. As someone trained in Reiki, Transcendental Meditation, and is a fifth-generation Buddhist, spirituality is what brought me into climate in the first place. We hope you enjoyed this episode in support of Movember, Men's Mental Health Awareness and Suicide Prevention Month. Before we dive into this episode, let's paint a picture of the current state of masculinity. We have the male loneliness epidemic, where 1 in 4 men ages 15 to 34 reported feeling lonely. Nearly all mass shooters are men. Men represent 80% of all suicide deaths in the US, and 1 in 4 men who are depressed will actually seek help, with the number one reason for not seeking help is because they, quote, learn to deal with it. And then I also want to address the elephant in the room.
Are you proud to be a white male today?
The speakers today, they all identify as white male. This is intentional because if we zoom in even further, white males have the highest suicidal rates amongst any group. They count for almost 70% of all suicide deaths. White males have committed over half of mass shootings, and white males are the top 10 wealthiest people in the world and hold the highest positions in office. White males have historically created the unjust systems we live in today, systems like colonialism and the patriarchy. But what if white males can be the solution as long as they choose spiritual fulfillment? Can white males infiltrate these systems from within and bring us into a more conscious and equitable society? We all know how white men have been the problem, but what if white men can be part of the solution? As STEWARD, we exist to hold space for duality. Today, we are going to talk to 3 men on the duality of having white male privilege as they left corporate careers to find spiritual fulfillment and how they now maintain family, jobs, and a personal life in New York City. Meet Abie Cohen.
I know nothing else than it is what how society would identify me. Absolutely. If you're not proud of who you are, I think there's a fundamental question there, and there's work to do.
Abie is a former financial advisor at the largest private bank in the world, Switzerland's UBS Bank. His spiritual journey led him to start his own venture fund, where now investing in someone's dreams and ambitions is his central motivation. We also have Jeremy Fisher.
Our job here is to be us. And so we're born into this body, and I feel like my job is to be me in this body as best as I can.
I've known Jeremy for over a decade, and the transformation he has undergone has been cosmic. When I first met Jeremy, he was a serial entrepreneur. Having worked investment banking in Silicon Valley, he founded a series of startups and has sold 2 companies. But today, Jeremy is a spiritual coach and guide. And then we have George McPherson.
It's hard to reconcile that in an affirmative way in relation to the monolith of white male. For me, I can be proud of myself as a white gay male, and I think that in relation to how that fits into the wider collective of all white men, there's work to do.
If you hail from the fashion industry, you may recognize his name. George was once the vice president at one of the top PR firms in the world, Starworks Groups, before founding his own publicity firm. He represented some of the top fashion brands in the world. He gradually started then working with more sustainable brands and NGOs. Then 3 years ago, he left the fashion industry altogether and now is a full-time sound meditation practitioner. Okay, this is a spicy one. Let's get into it.
I want to know about the spiritual arc of like your former version of yourself and now, and like where that spiritual arc brought you to. So Abie, let's start with you. Like, give me a picture of who you were before and how'd you start your spiritual journey and where you are now, how you view life now.
Yep. I grew up in a very religious, modern Orthodox Jewish community in Brooklyn where religion was paramount, but there was little spirit, at least from what I saw. fell out of favor with that in college, and then came back to spirit via meditation close to 15 years ago. Why or how, I have no idea, but got interested in it and exposed to it totally independent of anyone else I knew doing it or anyone else generally, and enjoyed it. And that took me to my curiosity around psychedelics, mostly from a cognitive perspective. Was very turned off by my first few psychedelic experiences, but realized rather quickly that it was doing much more than just helping me work on psychological things that I wanted to improve, and moved into spirit. And I saw a ton of advancement in various modalities with different teachers and practitioners around bringing spirit online in that way. And then it's continuing to evolve.
You said
Yeah.
different modalities help bring your spirit back online.
Yeah.
Was your spirit offline?
Yeah, I mean, there was a point during COVID where not only was I not religious, which obviously is very different than spiritual, but I was arguably atheist. The first breath work I did, something hit. I felt it.
What did you feel?
I felt emotions like I've never felt before.
Did you cry? What kind of?
Yeah, crying, laughing, blissful, anxiety, but like really felt that in my body in a way that I think I've never felt. All from breathing and presences of energies and spirits. Maybe they were on this world or some others that felt really exciting to be with and share space with. And that's just sort of evolved into various ways.
So you felt disembodied from spirit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I never felt embodied to feel disembodied, but
Okay.
I went into the
Body in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Jeremy, tell me about your spiritual arc.
Yeah. So also grew up in a Jewish household, but not religious at all, extremely secular. And I've been fascinated by philosophy and by religion since I was in high school, but from a very mental, intellectual standpoint. So I ended up studying philosophy and religion in college, but again, this was really an intellectual pursuit. So I would think about different philosophical arguments for the existence of God, and I would say, well, probabilistically, maybe there's God, right? But it was not a felt or embodied, to use your language, experience at all. And similar to Abie, I went until my 30s before using any substance outside of alcohol. And my first experience with psychedelics there was before and after.
Yeah. And
I think that what it showed me is that the world is not what we think, or the world was not what I thought, at least speaking for myself.
What did you think the world was?
Before,
Yeah.
I thought the world was about achievement, was about completing society's checklist, was about thinking about things. And I used to joke that my mind completely controlled my body and my feelings. I considered myself to be an extremely emotionally regulated person. But what I later learned was that I was an extremely emotionally dissociated person. And so what I thought was being regulated and not having big swings and up and down was really just a blunting of all feeling all of the time. And so fast forward many ceremonies later, and I would say that the key pillars for me have been plant medicine, Jungian psychology, and parts work. So I started out with internal family systems.
And can you explain internal family systems for those who don't know?
Yeah, sure. So if anybody's seen Inside Out, the Pixar film, that's a good kind of primer on this. So we have what spiritual traditions would call our higher self, capital S self, presence, whatever we want to call it. And that's who we really are, right? But we think about ourselves as this unified being, I'm just Jeremy, there's one of me. But actually there's multiple discrete subpersonalities. So anger, anxiety, addiction, these would all be different subpersonalities. And essentially these subpersonalities all want different things, and often those things are in conflict. And so we think about this in the way that we use language every day. A part of me wants to stay in and watch Netflix, and another part of me wants to go to dinner with friends, right? So we use this language all the time, and it actually alludes to something true about the structure and the nature of the psyche, which is that we contain multitudes, right? We contain all these different parts. And it turns out that you can actually converse with each of these parts. And when you converse with them, you discover that each of these parts actually has a positive intention for us. So the story goes something like this. You're 3 years old, and every time you cry, your mother yells at you. And as a 3-year-old, you can't simply just stop crying when you feel big emotions as a 3-year-old, right? You're 3. And so what happens is a part of you forms, and the part says, I have a brilliant strategy for you to not get yelled at and thus become unsafe. If we just don't allow you to feel, then you won't cry and then you won't get yelled at. So this part comes up with dissociation as a strategy to protect you. And that's actually extremely adaptive in the moment, right? That potentially might save your life as a child. But then that part doesn't just go away when that situation ends. The part sticks around essentially forever. And so then you're 30 years old and somebody criticizes you at the office and suddenly you're spaced out, right? And you're right back to being 3 years old in your bed, with your mother yelling at you. So parts work is an approach that we use to talk to that part, the dissociating part. And we simply meet that part with radical acceptance of who it is and what it's feeling. Because normally we've actually been pushing that part away. So just imagine if that part was a person who's really trying to help you, and yet you're simultaneously pushing it away. That's not going to feel good for that part. And so the more you push it away, the louder that part is going to get, because it's like, I have some really important message for you, Sophia. Like, I need to deliver this information to you. And yet you're like putting it out there in the closet. So now it's in the closet and it's going to start screaming at you so that you can hear it. And so that's how we end up with, profound dissociation or panic disorders, or, you name it. So it's a methodology used both in psychotherapy and also in coaching contexts.
Thank you, Jeremy. George, can you explain your spiritual arc?
Yeah, my spiritual journey. So I grew up in a family where no one was religious at all. There was not a family religion. It was not even really that culturally normal to be church-going where I grew up. However, for some reason, as a very precocious musical 10-year-old child, I decided I had to be a chorister at the cathedral in Newcastle, where I grew up. Without any real religious understanding, I loved the ceremony. I loved the tradition. I loved the idea of being able to perform. And what I didn't realize until maybe 5-6 years ago, when I delved deeper into sound, was I had the most incredible education into being with spirit from the perspective of sound, music, voice, in a very deep way that I'm still exploring. So I spent a long time really working with my voice in a very religious, sacred setting, and something resonates very deeply for me as to how I now work with sound in a meditative format, particularly using voice, and particularly allowing it to be a sort of a sacred bridge, if you like, giving people an opportunity to be with a space of curiosity and awe that I think from a very young age was informed in me. But in the years between being 11 and I guess however old I started doing this work as a sound practitioner, a lot of that fell by the wayside. And it wasn't until, let's say, 2018 that I really began to delve back into a lot of the concepts perhaps that I had some inkling around.
What brought you back? Why in 2018? Was there something that nudged you?
Our careers sort of nudged up against each other, working in sustainability. And there was a certain point where I realized from my career as a publicist that it didn't feel great to be continuing to try to influence people to do something from a pure publicity perspective. So I was looking for an out and had happened to come across Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass. And something within this sort of melding of worlds of science and tradition, indigenous wisdom, really opened something up in me. I'm still really grateful for having been able to spend time just leafing through this incredible book. Within the same window of time, I began to explore also working with psychedelics, which is an interesting through line for the three of us, which in itself is a privilege to be able to sit with some of these medicines and allow ourselves to be in a space where we are being confronted, but also being given insights. So little by little between 2018 and 2020, I began to explore different modalities, different formats of sitting in meditative spaces, ceremonial spaces. And at the very end of 2019, I sat with someone who became my teacher for sound meditation in its own right. And something really opened up there, an opportunity to listen differently, to feel differently. And as 2020, which we all know, was a turning point for many of us, I sort of began to back away from the career I'd always known and the familiar, consistent world I'd always known, and had the honor of being able to sit and learn from someone who had themselves sat in a sound meditation and heard something incredible that had changed their life, and it began to change mine. And yeah, so that was my turning point, really, moving from a world of publicity into a world of working with sound as a bridge to the divine, really.
And I know two of you mentioned that you grew up in religious households. What is the difference between being religious and being spiritual to you personally? Because I think in this Western context, they could be used interchangeably and sometimes not. So.
Well, I think that religion, I mean, I know that you sort of made that, oh, it's not this and it's that. I think we have become disconnected from a truth of religion being about spirituality. It has just become very ordered and conservative and very specific when we talk about it from the religious perspective. But there is spirituality in religion. At least that's my perspective. It just perhaps becomes a little, I don't know, archaic.
When I think of religion in that context, I think of it as an instruction manual, a way to go about living life day to day in a very specific way that hopefully in what's taught brings on spirit, but in a lot of instances it doesn't. I think of spirituality, I think of chaos. So the exact opposite of the regimented instructions of the religion that I grew up in, and open-mindedness or sort of this fluidity of going with what comes through spirit and where it could take you. I mean, I've never been. I've 6 books on my nightstand, and they range from one side to the other side, and they're all spiritual, but I wouldn't say any of them are religious per se. And that range, that chaos of it is very different than how I would define religion.
So religion is limiting, spirituality is expansive.
They're both ultimately like in pursuit of source, but the way I would define it, that going one or either of those routes would be limiting or expansive.
Religion is the glass and spirituality is the water.
Yeah.
And the glass may have water in it or it may not.
Nice.
Okay, so all three of you guys,
It's good.
let's give it up for Jeremy Fisher. Okay, so all three of you mention plant medicine, psychedelics. And obviously, this is a very privileged conversation we're having. There's layers of privilege here. But I'm just curious because it's like, how do we make sure as psychedelics and plant medicine becomes more accessible because people are seeking out this spiritual journey? How do we make sure we don't co-opt it from these indigenous communities? And how do we make sure we don't commodify it?
I mean, I'm happy to speak to that. I apprentice in an indigenous lineage in the Peruvian Amazon. And speaking just for the tradition that I apprentice in, because indigenous cosmologies seemingly have a lot of commonalities, but also inevitably a lot of differences. So I'll just speak from the perspective of what I know as an outsider, but apprentice within the Shipibo tradition, is that this is a tradition with a relational cosmovision. And so everything in the world is something that we can be in dialogue with, in relationship with. And when you're in relationship with something, what do? You ask permission, right? If I want your coat, I don't just take your coat. I'm like, oh, Sophia, I'm kind of cold. Would you mind if I borrowed your coat? And so that is a very relational way of engaging. And so I think that one way to think about how can we work with plant medicines in a way that is not co-opting, not appropriating, is to think about them relationally. So what does that mean? Well, one is for somebody who wants to serve them, are you serving them with permission? And that permission can come from a number of places. It can come from a teacher who's from one of these traditions, and it can also come from the medicine itself. And so you work with that kind of permission. You ask permission of the land that you're doing that work on, and you treat the medicine as a living being that you can be in relationship with. Now, that applies to plant medicines, certainly. Does that also apply to synthetics? Does it apply to MDMA? Does it apply to LSD? Unclear. I think that thinking about things relationally, thinking about these as beings that we can engage with, is a very helpful way of doing it. I'll also say that, speaking only for the families that I've worked with in particular, and recognizing that just like any people, different indigenous people are going to have completely different perspectives on things. But the perspective of the people who I train with, almost by definition, because they're allowing a white Westerner to be an apprentice, believe that that's okay. And not only do they believe that it's okay, it's actually something that, from their perspective, the medicine has told them is extremely important. Their mission is to introduce, to teach their ways to Westerners who are primarily white, probably pretty evenly split between men and women, but primarily white Westerners, to share this medicine, because the message they've received is that the West needs that medicine. And there are not enough of them. Not only are there not enough Shipibo to carry it, most Shipibo children want to have nothing to do with these ancient traditions. They want to be on TikTok just like teenagers want to be on TikTok here. Yeah. They're not like, oh, I think it would be really cool to be a curandero, which is, the colloquial term in Spanish for, what often is called a shaman here. So, and that's not to say there aren't young indigenous who do want to do that, but by and large, those kids are really enamored by the West. And something that I saw was really interesting in Brazil, so this is not really happening on the Peru side where I primarily work, but more so in Brazil, is that it's actually come back around. So in Brazil, the young people have seen how cool Westerners think psychedelics are, and that has given psychedelics, specifically ayahuasca, cachet with the young people. So now the young people are like, oh, I actually want to get involved in that because I can be a rock star of sorts. So you have this experience where they're 15 to 25-year-old indigenous who are members of tribes like the Huniquin, the Yawanawa. They live in villages that would take you 5 or 6 days to get to from the United States, right? So you're taking, you know, a 14-hour flight or whatever, and then you're on a boat for multiple nights. There's no electricity in these villages, and some of these kids have like 8,000 Instagram followers, right? It is a very bizarre
dynamic.
that we're living.
That's the duality we live in.
Yes.
And it reminds me of how traditional Chinese medicine, the practices there have declined in China. And I asked my cousins and my family there about TCM practices. But because there's been a resurgence of TCM here in New York and in the US, now a lot of the youth in China are studying it now because they're like, oh, on TikTok or Douyin in China, it's cool.
Right.
Yeah, that's the duality.
Yeah.
And that's just, I think that those are just continuous cycles of colonialization that it's like happening over and over again, but that we're trying to understand the root source, like the remembrance.
Yeah. I want to just add one thing to that, if that's okay. Because I think there's an assumption that these indigenous cultures are static. Like there's a way that they've done things and that's been unchanging for thousands of years.
No, but they've been evolving just like we have. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And so when my teachers are singing in ceremony, they're singing about putting on their bulletproof vest and like wielding their swords and stuff like that. And bulletproof vests and swords are not traditional Amazonian items, right? So, and they're using gasoline and they're using perfumes that are produced in New York in their ceremonies and all sorts of things that are not native to that region, right? So I find that curanderos, people who facilitate these shamans, are some of the most experimental people I've ever met. And one of the things that's been really interesting is I was with my teacher recently and he was talking and he was saying stuff that I was like, this sounds incredibly Buddhist. Like, this is not traditional Shipibo understanding. And I was like, where are you getting these concepts of non-duality from? Like, this does not sound very Amazonian. He said, oh, well, you guys took the plants, and so the plants learned about it from you, and then the plants taught me. Very mysterious.
Wow. It's like the plants have had a whole migration pattern as well.
They're learning from us.
They're learning from us too. It's that, again, that's the dialogue. It's relational. Can you each describe your relationship with work now? Jeremy, you know, I was reading your website and you said that like the American dream, I think the American dream for a white man is very much this. It's get good grades, go to a prestigious college, land a high-paying job, make millions, find the perfect partner, buy a dream home, stay fit, travel the world. That's the American white male dream. And you quickly realized that was not very fulfilling.
It wasn't quickly. It took a long time to realize. It took 35 years.
So what is your relationship with work, each of you? And what is your American dream now?
Work is necessary to put food on the table, to give me the opportunity to then pursue spirit. It's evolving. There are easy days and hard days, but it's important. And what I'm trying to do now more than ever in what I do at work and investing in companies and founders is to invest in those founders as if I were to invest in an individual and trying to help introduce them to spirit or help them with something they're needing help with. So I sort of mirror the two exposures to individuals, and hopefully there's an opportunity within work to both help them build a company and help them as individuals.
So a term that's very popular in psychedelic spaces is integration. And integration means taking what's over here, the experience that we just had in our life, which is over here, and bringing those two things together, right? That's integration. So I think about everything, or I try to think about everything, again, aspirationally in my life in an integrated way. So I don't want my work to be something that feels like it's over there and the rest of my life like over here. And that's not about not having boundaries, and that's not about answering emails at all time, but it's about feeling that what I am doing is aligned and is resonant with me, and trusting that. And I think that is been one of the most profound gifts of my spirituality and my spiritual journey, is developing trust that I am held and taken care of, and that the universe is ultimately a benevolent place. And particularly in my work with a Jungian analyst, looking at things archetypally, like if this was a myth, if my life was a myth, what is the invitation of this experience? And I think the invitation for me has been, can I make money in ways that feel purely aligned, and trust that I will lead exactly the life that I'm supposed to lead if I do that? And I think a big shift that happened for me, and is constantly happening, and I have moments of not being in this place, is feeling like I'm here to serve life rather than life is here to serve me. And this is something that Richard Rohr uses to distinguish the first half of life from the second half of life. And I hope I'm still in the first half from a year's perspective. But really, like, I feel that very deeply most of the time, where it's like life is living through me.
Vessel.
Yeah, I'm the vessel for it. And so it's really just being more disconnected from, oh, like I want this, I want that, and distinguishing between preferences and attachments, right?
Yeah, my relationship to work is an interesting one. I made a comment earlier about feeling like I wanted to move away from this idea of being a publicist, because it felt like I was in a place of constantly trying to influence people and communicating, like you got my emails millions of times a day to try to get people to write about something or come to an event or do something. And I found myself in this world now, which again is a complete privilege, and I could never have imagined that I would have found a role for myself that would allow me to, 5 years after discovering how to work with sound, lead sound meditations on a regular basis, and also have a job in a relatively corporate setting that allowed me to create a space where a community can gather and discover little by little routes towards their own spirituality themselves. And what I find is, having moved out of this world of publicity, it was all I knew for 20 years, into this sphere of working with sound and working with mindfulness and working with people on a different level, is what's a relief to me, what is heartening, what feels good in my body about it, is rather than coercing someone or rather than trying to influence someone's behavior, simply by a gesture of working with sound and creating a meditative space where people can feel they can be calm, they can reset, they can renew, they can just allow themselves to have a little moment in the middle of a busy day in one of the busiest cities in the world. That for me feels like a really good way of balancing what work is and what I feel passionate about and what I love. And hopefully what I love, what is in my body, what I want to be able to communicate, comes through the work I do.
George, I feel like, you were representing some of the biggest fashion brands in the world. You would be a staple at every fashion week. And then I feel like you had a gradual shift. Like first you then only worked with sustainable brands and independent designers. And then, you be more intentional with the clients you took on. And then you fully went sound practitioner.
Yeah.
What was like the final kind of lever that was like, you know what?
Yeah. What was that?
I want to leave this industry completely.
Yeah, I think one was that an opportunity was offered, and I think that I had been for a while just exploring how to balance the two. And there was a place, and just to use Jeremy's word, of alignment. It no longer really felt aligned. And being in two modes at the same time, where one would be like doing all the emails, preparing for a guest list, preparing for an event, getting samples to someone, and then on one evening a week, having a very different version of George sitting there in front of a group of people who were coming for their own rest, their own medicine from sitting with sound, the two no longer lined up. I felt like there was the manic chaos of publicity, which just is a given pretty much. I've never really met a chilled out PR person. Maybe there's a few lying around, literally. And so, yeah, I wanted to be more in the world that I had been leaning towards. And so, yeah, the space that I work at on the Upper East Side had invited me to not just teach in it, not just lead meditations, but become the head of programming. And that was a blessing, really. I don't know whether it means I've fully converted from being in the corporate world to not corporate world, because sometimes it does feel corporate and it's an interesting balance in itself. But I think that's just my karma, is that I have to constantly be in this world of this and that, and both can exist at the same time.
Yeah. So there was one point where the code switching was just complete, not just code switching, it was misalignment.
Code switching is the most appropriate term. Yeah. I mean, and I think and all of the things I'd learned along the way, particularly from moving from luxury or masstige fashion to working with sustainably minded brands, to working with organizations that were more in the nonprofit space, I had found myself following a trail of breadcrumbs that I didn't know that's what it was for, but it allowed for me to maybe move comfortably into a space where I felt confident talking about the thing that I cared about, and how it could be a space for people to interpret spirituality in their own way. Like they were steps that I didn't know at the time, but they led me towards that.
So for anyone who's listening and they're on their own path of spirituality, understanding where they are in the journey, perhaps code switching a lot, like what are the signs that can help them tap into that more alignment?
Other people, community. You know, we're not here to do it on our own, ever. And the moment we feel we are on our own doing it is probably the moment we need to look outside of ourselves. You know, I think there is a place in which isolation feels really good when you're learning new things, and maybe you've had incredible experiences in the ceremony. But actually, when we talk about integration too, like that is, yeah, you can sit there and contemplate on your own and do the deep inner work. But just like the mycelium roots that connect all of the mushrooms in your world, we're an ecosystem, and we are supposed to be that. You know, we're supposed to learn together, grow together. And speaking to, you know, religion, spirituality, that is what a congregation was for. That is what community is built upon. And that's where, in some ways, we've stepped away so far from those spaces that at one point were our gathering places. And now we're finding new ways of being, new churches, quite literally new churches too, in some of the cases with the plant medicine world.
Yeah, I mean, community is huge. And in indigenous contexts, medicines are almost always used communally. So this very Western idea, which comes from Terence McKenna, of taking 5 dried grams of mushrooms alone in silent darkness, is just that, a very Western idea. One of the ways that I work with clients and friends around tapping into this is following intuition. And one of the best ways to follow intuition is curiosity, because our curiosity is coming from that deeper place in us. Curiosity is sitting more centrally for us than any of our ego structures, than ambition, than healing from some wound. So the things that we are naturally curious about point us towards our dharma, point us towards the work that we're supposed to do. And just to be clear for people who are listening, being spiritual doesn't mean you have to have a, quote, spiritual job. You don't have to be a sound practitioner. You don't have to be a coach, although seemingly everybody thinks that you should be one of those two things if you're going to be spiritual, or maybe
breathwork teacher.
Or breathwork. Yes, I forgot that. Or serve tea. These are like the 4 spiritual, the 4 spiritual jobs.
The 4 pillars of spirituality.
But you can, you know, it happened to be my dharma, my path to be a coach, and George's to be a sound practitioner. But your dharma as a spiritual person might be to be an investor. Mm-hmm. And it might be to be, as Ram Dass says, a policeman, or it might be to be a protester. And all of those things can be expressions of spirituality.
Did anyone in your personal lives, partners, family members, friends, colleagues, like react in a certain way? How did you describe this like turning point? Because like outwardly you're the same, but inwardly you feel like there was a shift, there was a spark. What was that communication of reintroducing yourself to your world? What did that look like?
I think a lot of people drop off, actually. I think,
Dropped off.
yeah. But I don't know whose responsibility that lies with, but I feel like as you go through a process that maybe one person might call an awakening, or another person might be like, oh, I just feel differently. I just noticed that there were certain, going back to that word of alignment, there were certain relationships that were no longer even, it didn't even feel close anymore to where I'd been. And so there was definitely a little reactivity to a certain degree, but it's a shedding at the same time. Yeah. So I don't hold it in a particularly negative light, other than I don't have room for this. And maybe that person or people don't really have room for me.
Yeah, you're like getting
I was
now.
just going through the motions there. Yeah.
Yes. And maybe, is it because like we live in such a world of transaction and you were finally like, you know what? No more.
A little maybe, and maybe one's appetite or ability to be in relationship for something that doesn't nourish or feed, and there's definitely a level of discernment perhaps that comes along with that, and also maybe a place of me thinking, oh God, well, maybe I was the reactive one. Maybe in that moment of shifting my perspective, like in that stage wasn't able to hold all of those things together. So there's a lot of learning that comes from that too. Yeah.
Certainly my advice to people now would be show, don't tell.
Yeah.
Right. And I made that mistake. I was definitely showing, but I was also doing a lot of telling. I was doing a lot of telling.
You're like, old habits die hard.
And, I think there is a sort of a meme of the person who does psychedelics for the first time and then is the evangelist for it and cannot stop talking about it. And that was me for quite a few years, and probably still is to some extent. I'm doing it right now. So, yeah. But I think that really ultimately it's about how we show up.
Abie, how did you navigate?
The first weeks of the first post-psilocybin journey, there was definitely some preaching to those that felt could benefit from having an experience of that. And the people were generally receptive. I think if they're generally genuine and authentic and sincere with what I say, and people are willing to listen, that I came across. And then now, I'd say, I think one through line that like both of you didn't touch on, that theme that was exposed, is the concept of leadership. I feel a little bit more of a leader now than I ever have. And not because I was pursuing leadership, but just a little more confident in the way I walk through the world, and in the way I engage with people. And everybody sort of takes from a conversation or an engagement with me what they feel like they need to take, and I give what I need to give and what they need to receive. Some of those conversations are exciting and around spiritual awakening, and some of them are very dry and around, dollars and cents. I know where my energy feels fuller, which conversations feel better and worse, and I will be shedding those, that my feeling of how I sort of engage with people. But when I cross paths with meant to cross paths, then you can take what they need from the engagement.
So how do we translate this inner work, this individual healing? How is it conducive to bring that to a collective healing for us to tackle the multi-crises we have in our world today? Climate, inequality, inequity, genocides, refugee displacement, the list goes on. How does the inner work then translate outwardly to collective work?
Access. access for the things that we do, and I think that also speaks in some ways to that rarefied element of privilege to be able to be in these spaces, be in these conversations, be in these practices, and be in this work. It really means nothing if it's just for me. And so for me personally, being a part of creating spaces that invite other people into them, regardless of what that level is, whether they're a beginner, whether they're coming back into a practice, whether they are advanced, whether they've never even heard of these things before. That for me is my commitment and part of the collective shift that's necessary to be able to not just be with all of the great things that I might have received from this, but that be my mission, to let it literally emanate from me in as inviting a way as possible and as accessible a way as possible, which is a constant conundrum that kind of I sit with,
I mean, my work, conscious or not, is done on a one person to one person basis, but I'm the biggest believer of it being like the quintessential butterfly effect. Like one individual in helping them can compound in indefinite ways, and whether that means that person actually becomes the president of the United States and then can influence things on a mass scale, or that person helps one other person, that person helps one other person, and we sort of very slowly start touching everyone over time. Like that's an individual approach. And I don't think I'm ever going to be standing at the pulpit and preaching anything to more than one person at a time.
Just that one-on-one is enough. It's fascinating. In the Western world, we have Maslow's hierarchy of needs. On the top of the pyramid is self-actualization. In a lot of indigenous communities and in Eastern culture as well, the ideology is that there's an inverted pyramid on top of the pyramid where once you reach self-actualization, you reach that in order to give it back to community. Self-actualization, what good does it do if it's just for self? Self-actualization is so you could bring it to collective and community actualization. I'm going to do a quick round of rapid questions and then we'll wrap this up. How do you get your dopamine now?
Being outside, for me, is my favorite thing. My dog walk in the morning is like total happiness.
Jeremy?
Dinners with friends.
Abie?
Lifting weights, moving my body, moving my energy.
Daily morning spiritual practice you never skip.
Go humming for 5 minutes.
Humming?
Yeah.
Can you give us a little...
It's really easy. We've all done it before.
Just show us.
You do it with me. Inhale through the nose. Exhale on your hum. Can't beat it. 3 minutes a day minimum.
Jeremy?
Gratitude at meals.
Gratitude at meals. Abie?
I say very traditional Jewish prayer upon awakening, modani, which is just thanking God for returning your soul after sleep.
Gratitude. Beautiful.
Yeah, exactly.
Biggest myth about spirituality you want to break?
It's only for some people.
Yeah. No notes.
Abie?
Oh, it's new age, that it's temporary.
Yeah, it's actually remembrance. It's the most hold age of all. How do you recenter yourself when overwhelmed, especially in New York City? George?
Sit in a quiet, dark place or go to a flotation tank.
Jeremy?
Get to nature.
Get to nature. Abie?
Listen to some special beats on Spotify, something.
Like solfeggio frequencies or... Yeah. Biggest sign that someone has outgrown the corporate mold?
I don't know. You look in the mirror one day and it doesn't feel right.
Okay, sure.
They're suffering and they've done work around it and they're still suffering.
Abie?
They're not present in that environment when they should be.
I know this is rapid fire, but can you explain that? Because I think a lot of us, how do you know when you're not present?
I'm speaking about observing someone else and feeling that seeing them, that they've grown out of that corporate mold and making the assumption or the judgment that they're not happy in the corporate mold, but with them showing that they're not present.
So they're disassociating. Okay. And last one, what's something you never thought you would believe in, but now you do from your spirituality practice?
Reincarnation.
I mean, literally everything.
Okay.
Reincarnation, astrology, I mean, God, yeah, I mean, a lot of things. Yeah.
Aliens. Yeah. But that's just the beginning.
That's just the beginning, as we said. All right.
Perfect close.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, understand this is a very vulnerable conversation. Thank you so much for being here today. It's also a very privileged conversation, so I'm so grateful to have it together. Thank you so much for just being here, being present, and being on the journey with me. Thank you so much for being part of Steward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in. If you found this conversation valuable, please share it with your men in your life who are also on their spiritual journey and anyone else who you think could benefit from this episode. A special thank you to 113 Spring for hosting us. 113 Spring is a new holistic wellness destination in Soho focused on longevity backed by science. They are offering Steward listeners a complimentary beverage when booking a session. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to rate and review Steward wherever you listen. See you next time.